My name is Mark Langerman, and I'm asking America to wake up. Wake up on the East Coast, wake up on the West Coast, Bible Belt, wake up American Jewish community, wake up evangelical Christian community. Wake up to the fact that the governments of Iran and Syria are enemies of America and Israel. They're enemies of Western values and to freedom. We've heard it all before, the public executions, the quashing of free speech and free press, the literal electronic wall of secrecy that they cloak over their societies, their nuclear ambitions, and finally their ongoing support of brutal terrorism. Their leaders continue to call for the destruction of America and Israel on a regular basis. Does this sound like the outstretched arm of peace? No, simply because it's not. Americans continue to look the other way, even when a major assassination plot by Iran is uncovered in our nation's capital. Supporters of Israel continue to look the other way and hope for a better outcome, or that they are bluffing. They are not bluffing. Their actions prove that. People need to start taking some measure of active responsibility for what is going on in the Middle East. Americans need to stop relying solely on our government to get us out of this situation and take an active role in the war on terror. Iran and Syria want the destruction of America and our allies. They do not want to live side by side peacefully. It's only a question of time until they lose. You can shorten that timeline by taking some action. Israel announced on March 5th that they seized a ship in the Red Sea that was headed for the Gaza Strip. Aboard the ship was no ordinary cargo. They were transporting large cache of arms of Syrian-made M302 rockets. However deserving this story was of front-page news and headline status, it didn't make it, primarily because of what's going on in the Ukraine. But here's why it should have made the news, and it should have made the front page. The ship didn't just appear out of nowhere in the middle of the Red Sea carrying rockets. This shipment's journey started in Damascus, then made its way to Iran, then to Bandar Abbas, Iraq, and then onto the Panamanian freighter and off on their way to the Gaza Strip. Here's where I think many people miss the point. Operations like this are not cheap. They're very expensive to put together. They cost a lot of money. There's no mystery to it. And you've got to ask yourself, how do countries like Iran and Syria afford to fund these terror efforts? Where do they get the sophisticated technology necessary to coordinate these programs? How do they finance them? Where do they get their supplies? The answer to these questions are simply, they get them from American companies, they get them from British companies, they get them from German companies, companies all throughout the world. And despite international sanctions, hundreds of companies around the globe are still doing business with these state sponsors of terrorism. What can you do to stop this from happening again and again? To stop these companies from supporting the enemies of the United States of America and all Western countries for that matter? Of course, you can support sanctions legislation and do all the important things that you're doing. But the real key to stopping these countries from proliferating terrorism and pursuing their nuclear programs is to hit them in the pocketbooks. Hit their economies, slow their economies, stop their economies. These countries are not economically self-sufficient without Western support. You may not be aware of it, but you likely own stocks and bonds of companies in your portfolios, your IRAs, your regular investment accounts that do business with Iran and Syria. Think about that. And think about this too. If every Western company pulled out of Iran and Syria and stopped doing business there, without equivocation, the world would be in a lot better shape in a short period of time. These countries would not be able to support their economies. They would likely fail, and if not fail, they would certainly falter. And if they falter, they have less money and fewer resources to spend on harming us. Remember one thing, terrorism costs money. So this is not an esoteric discussion. It's practical, it's real, and it's honest. We can't continue to have it both ways, supporting unfettered capitalism, unchecked capitalism, while expecting to economically isolate these enemies simply through economic sanctions. Sanctions are not enough. Think about this. Every dollar that we invest has some type of consequence. If the dollars that you invest go to help the economies of terror-sponsoring countries, you can actually stop that. You can make a difference. If you really want to take an active role in the economic war on terrorism, do something about it. Capitalism and profit are great pursuits. They were some of the greater principles that our country was founded on. But we can't rely solely on the collective conscience of these companies because they've shown time and again that they don't have the conscience when it comes to do this. They don't have the self-control to say, we're not going to do business with state sponsors of terrorism. We are going to hold ourselves to a higher standard than is simply required by a minimum of the law. Here's the proof. Just last week, the Iranian government boasted that with the relaxation of sanctions, that Iran is now, quote unquote, open for business. Despite international sanctions, hundreds of companies around the globe still do business with these state sponsors of terrorism. And yes, even U.S. companies. There's something inherently wrong with that. Not the least of which is that it shows the lack of restraint that these companies have when not held to a higher standard. Not by a government, but by investors who will not buy their stock. A few years ago, I was attending a conference in Washington, D.C., and learned that there was no process that would allow me to screen these stocks out of my portfolio. Frankly, I was outraged. At that point, I had been a financial advisor for over 22 years, and I had really no idea that this was even legal. It was the first time I had heard of it. According to a December 31st, 2011 report by IW Financial, 10% of the S&P 500, that's almost $1.4 trillion in market capitalization, is considered to be terror infected. Americans can make a difference. We can make them stop doing business with these countries, and we actually have the power. The question is, do we have the will? Americans can hold these companies accountable by investing terror-free, by excluding their stocks from their mutual funds, by saying to these companies that if they choose to do business with our enemies, they can, but not with our money, not with my money. At the end of the day, we make qualitative decisions all day long about how to spend and how to invest our hard-earned dollars. There is a bigger picture here. You can do well by doing good. You can go to sleep at night knowing that you've made a huge contribution to a safer America, to a safer future for your children. I've been working to get Americans to invest terror-free for over 7 years, long before the mutual fund started, and I'm going to continue no matter what. This is one man's opinion. Please consider it carefully. There is something you can do. You can have an impact. You can change things. Thank you.